My Lords, I too would like to thank the Right Reverend Lord Bishop of Exeter for securing this important and timely debate. The April 2012 report of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office on Human Rights and Democracy reminds us of some of the injustices suffered by Arabs living in Israel, with Israeli NGOs reporting a denial of basic hygiene, sleep deprivation, and violence in interrogations. Allegations of unequal treatment of Arabs by the Israeli judicial system, and allegations of abuse of Arab detainees during arrest in Israeli prisons. It's to the credit of Israel, my lords, that the country's constitution does guarantee freedom of religion for Christian, Muslim, and other Arab minorities. And in general, they're allowed to get on with their own lives, although, as Lord Parekh reminds us, generally in lesser employment. Non-Jewish citizens are exempt from compulsory service in the Israeli Defense Forces, a concession that also underlines a lack of trust over possible divided loyalties. While politically Israeli Muslims are part of the state, loyalties are bound to be influenced by what happens to their kith and kin in Palestinian areas. Concerns over evidence of aggressive Israeli policies in Palestinian territories affect and add to tensions and mistrust between Jews and Arabs in Israel. These include expansion of illegal Jewish settlements in Palestinian areas, with demolition of Palestinian homes and evictions of Palestinians from East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And the use of military courts for alleged breaches of the peace by Palestinians, contrasting with civil courts for the same offences by Jews. And concerns that cases heard by the military court system are frequently based on secret evidence not available to their lawyers, or based on dubious confessions, or from the evidence of minors themselves facing detention. Cases of wrongful killing by Israeli defense forces are investigated by the same defense forces rather than by independent investigators. But, my lords, Israel is not alone in this abuse of human rights. Palestinians, too, are frequently involved in gross abuse of the rights of other faiths. These include arbitrary detention, restrictions on freedom of non-Muslims, the use of the death penalty. Palestinian human rights NGOs point out that senior positions in courts in Gaza are often filled by political appointees. There are also reports of violence against detainees. My lords, when we consider the history of the formation of Israel, with the arbitrary displacement of the Palestinian population and the subsequent history of continuing conflicts, it's easy to understand allegations of divided loyalties in the Arab-Israeli population, the anger and bitterness of surrounding Palestinians, and the hostility of the wider Muslim world. It's also easy to understand and have a measure of sympathy for the siege mentality of Israeli Jews. It's only when we look to and understand the difficult environment in which they work can we begin to understand the incredible courage and commitment of both Israeli and Arab NGOs and international human rights groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and humanitarian organisations like the Red Cross and the UK-funded NGO Defence of Children. They deserve our appreciation and support in their near impossible work. My lords, it's frequently said that the only solution for peace and respect for human rights in this troubled part of the world is a two-state solution with a fully independent Palestine. I myself may be in a minority of one, but I would prefer to see positive initiatives for closer integration between the different communities based on mutual interest. I'm not very convinced about the feasibility of artificial boundaries dividing an area of land which in part is historically and culturally entwined with shared history and culture. Recent history reminds us that rigid partition of a country where different groups share a common heritage inevitably leads to resentment and continuing conflict. The partition of the subcontinent of India cost millions of lives, with a continuing standoff over Kashmir. We have the continuing threat to peace arising from the partition of Korea, the genocide resulting from the partition of the former Yugoslavia, and nearer home, the years of conflict in Northern Ireland. My lords, I know that religion has got a bad press, but with the constant failure of political initiatives, it might just be worth looking at actual religious teachings in a search for elusive peace. At a time of similar conflict between Hindus and Muslims and different factions of those religions in the subcontinent of India, Guru Gobind Singh reminded warring factions that despite their different religious and cultural practices, the Hindus and Muslims, the Shias and the Sunnis were all members of the same one human family, with similar concerns, praying to the same one God. Leviticus 20:33-34 stresses the same sentiment. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your own. You shall love him as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. And in the Quran, Surah 14:6 says much the same thing. A few years ago, I was invited by the Chief Rabbi, Lord Sachs, to join him on a visit to Israel to help look to ways to peace. We talked to university professors, to office and manual workers in both the Jewish and Palestinian community, and everywhere found a common desire in people to be allowed to just get on with their own lives and look to their families in safety and security. They simply wished for the opportunity to live in peace and harmony with their neighbor in the way taught by their different faiths. My lords, in what now seems like a previous incarnation, I studied the works of Mary Parker Follett on conflict resolution in industry and used what she called the law of the situation with success. It's a concept that gets away from the usual two sides of a conflict or dispute and invites those involved to look at the different facets of common problems with a view of getting the best outcome for those concerned. The signing of peace accords that ignore basic underlying concerns is like building grandiose structures on uncertain foundations and is unlikely to lead to lasting peace. The more I look at this sad and beautiful land, sacred to the world's major faiths, the more convinced I become that the only way to true and lasting peace is for members of those different faiths to look beyond the trappings of religion to the common imperatives of respect and generosity to others contained in actual teachings. The NGOs working to highlight human rights abuses and provide humanitarian assistance are doing just this. It's important that we in the international community do all we can to support them. Addressing entrenched attitudes and prejudices is not easy. And this does not capture many headlines, but it's a challenge that can be met, as a Christian hymn reminds us that with faith, a weak arm can turn the iron helm of fate.